Okay, cool. All right, so welcome everybody. I'm Annyce Davis. This is my Twitter handle here on the bottom, Brown Girl Dev, and you'll see that I already have posted links to the resources as well as the slides. So if you want to take pictures, it's just because you appreciate this dress. All right. Now, the phrase "first do no harm," that's often associated with the Hippocratic Oath. Thank you. This oath contains various ethical standards that doctors should swear by, and the purpose is to ensure that they provide high-quality care to their patients. In fact, it takes a whole lot to become a doctor. This is pretty much what I was able to gather from a doctor friend. So we see like you have to major in math and science, there's a ton of exams, internships, residencies, spread over a course of 7 to 9 years. Now, why do you think we require so much from doctors? It's obvious, right? Because we trust them with our lives and the lives of our friends and family. Now, as software developers, we have the power to connect people with the information that they need the most, especially when they're on the go. As mobile developers, they have so many different applications that they need in order to just do their lives. Now, unlike doctors, we weren't required to take some type of oath or pledge when we became an Android developer, but we could still learn a lot from the principles behind that phrase, "first do no harm." One question I get asked often is, "Annyce, how can I become an Android developer?" Today, I hope to shed some light on not only this question, but this one as well. How can you become a great Android developer? Everything you do in life, if you want to have ultimate success, it's going to take hard work, dedication, perseverance. And so I've kind of been thinking through how can we really do this in the Android space? And I've come up with these 3 main areas that we can look at. And the first one is related to how we approach study. Now, as we just covered, doctors spend a lot of time on their education. But once they become a doctor, they don't just stop learning. They're not like, done, know everything about medicine, right? They go to conferences, they take courses on the latest medical procedures, they read medical journals, all in an effort to stay up to date and relevant. Now, as Android developers, we too have ways to stay informed of the latest advancements in our field. So I'm going to share with you 5 of the ways that I personally find to kind of help me level up my Android skills. And at this point, we're going to pretty much insert all comments from the keynote here. So you'll notice there's a little bit of overlap with some of the things that when mentioned help her to kind of be like water. So I'll quickly skim through those and then focus on the things that I have that are unique. So the first thing, of course, was newsletters. So she mentioned these. These are 3 of the favorite ones: Kotlin Weekly, Android Weekly, Android Dev Digest. I really like them because I tend to be like Twitter crazy, but I've clicked on some of the most ridiculous links from Twitter. It's like useless articles. And so I know that if it's in a newsletter, someone else has already vetted it for me. So I can kind of say, all right, great, I'm gonna spend time and look at these 3 articles specifically from any given newsletter. Also podcasts, these are the ones that I listen to the most. I tend to be like on the go. So I like to go walking in the morning. I have to do a lot of laundry. That's just my plot in life. And I do a lot of things and I'll listen. I don't hear it all, but it may be like 1 or 2 things in a podcast and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll follow up on that later. What's especially nice about Android developers backstage, so I want to call that one out, is that they'll have people who actually work on Android on the podcast. So often if you're reading different articles or blogs, you find out like how to do something, but by listening to this podcast, you find out why you have to do it that certain way. So that's like a very unique thing that you can get from listening to the ADB podcast. Now, the third tool is going to be online courses. They're invaluable because you get to go at your own pace. They typically cover all aspects of Android development. So maybe you're struggling with understanding layout files, or you want to know how to publish your app on Google Play. You can get all of that from an online course. And then also, depending on the company and the course's author, you get a different perspective. So even though you may see the same thing on using MVP, for example, every single example I've seen does it differently, depending on who the person is. And I kind of take away like one little thing from each person, and that's really cool about online courses. For example, these are 4 different courses from Udacity, and I've taken all of these courses actually. And notice how some are advanced, some are for beginners, but I learned something in every single course. So part of growing, studying, learning is kind of having that humility that like no one knows it all, and you'll constantly be learning as you grow as an Android developer, and that is okay. The final site I want to mention is caster.io. All of the authors here are actual experts in the industry who create Android applications for a living. In full disclosure, I'm one of the instructors, but I take the courses of my fellow instructors. So I've learned a lot from the things that they teach as well. And so here's the quote for the presentation. I want you to enjoy it. What I appreciated about this one is that, to me, it means if you spend time with people who are already like flying high, so to speak, then you can be more successful, you can achieve. And a great way to do that, of course, is by attending conferences just like where you are today. So if you take just a moment and you kind of look to your left and look to your right, just appreciate, the people here in the room. You're here among the experts, people who are working in this space, who want to learn about this space, or just extremely passionate about it. And this is a perfect situation for you to try to grow your network, learn new techniques. Maybe you're not doing anything in IoT. There's an IoT expert running the conference. Like, connect with that person. Who knows where you're going to be 2 years from now? Then you can tap into your network and continue to grow. Or here's another thing. Perhaps, we've always used tool X to accomplish something. Come to a conference and they're like, tool Y. All of a sudden, you're in love. You have this like new way of getting things done, all because you were able to take advantage of attending a conference. Now on to our final learning tool, and that's open source. Open source libraries are really cool because you get a lot of examples for implementing functionality in your application. You can often learn by doing, especially if you have a schedule that allows you to contribute to open source. One thing I like to do is check out the design patterns in the open source libraries I use. So I'm already including this in my code. I open it up, see what they're doing. Maybe they have a cool use of the builder pattern. Maybe they have a unique way of configuring things. All of this by taking advantage of free code that people put out there in the internet. Now, one thing I love about GitHub is stars. If you look, I star like everything. I need a way to like filter my stars. But anyway, if you work for GitHub, I gave you a free feature. I keep track of different sample apps, libraries, just anything I think like, that's interesting. Maybe one day I might want to use that. I put a star on it. Also, I follow other developers who I respect in the Android space. So sometimes I can't find it all, but hey, maybe Mike found something cool, and I'll see what he's up to on GitHub. So just another way of kind of keeping myself up there with the Eagles. Now, when it comes to study, the Android community is absolutely awesome because almost all those things I mentioned are free. It's just people willing to share their expertise with you, but you have to be willing to do the effort, avail yourself of what's out there. Now onto our second area for becoming great Android developers, and that's prevention. So if you're queasy, prepare yourself. Now, in the medical profession, it's common practice to vaccinate children against diseases, right? They believe that vaccines reduce the risk of infection by working with your body's natural defenses. Likewise, we can reduce the number of defects in our applications by taking steps to prevent them from the start. Just makes sense, right? So we're going to look at 4 items that can help us to do that. So we've got static code analysis, code reviews, leak canary, and then testing. So let's start with static code analysis. When it comes to static code checkers in Java, they typically come in two flavors, those that work on the source code and those that work on the compiled bytecode. Now, they all work slightly differently, but they do share very similar traits. And these are the four that I find the most useful. So check style, lint, FindBugs, and PMD. With the shift to Kotlin, it's a little up in the air, but still don't abandon static code analysis just because of a new language. I took a brief survey of almost 200 different Android developers, and I asked them, like, what tools are you using in your day-to-day development? Here's the results on the static code analysis questions. You see, like, almost everyone relies on lint, which is amazing, great. But there's also a huge number of people who use check style and FindBugs in their day-to-day development. So speaking of FindBugs, let's see what it's all about. It looks at your code to try to find patterns of bad behavior. So basically have a database like, here's a bunch of things we see people do wrong. And then they look at your code and they go, okay, so here's 4 high priority things you're doing wrong, and then here's 62. And you can kind of go through one by one. Here's an example of what it'll tell you. MS cannot be final. Okay, this field isn't final, you can't protect it. All right, so maybe that's like an oversight. Or perhaps your class is not static and it should be. So it's just kind of like having this somewhat, neutral friend looking over your shoulder to help you catch things that you may have inadvertently missed. Now I want you to put on like your imagination caps. We're adults, so we don't like imagine things, but imagine you're going in for major surgery, and there's just one doctor in the room, like this kind of scary looking doctor like this, right? So no doubt you're already nervous, but now like your level of anxiety is going to increase. But if you're in that same room and there's a team of doctors, then you would feel a little more at ease. You have someone monitoring your vitals. You have someone making sure they're using the right tools. You have someone making sure they're following the proper procedure. All of this is going to help you have a successful operation. And that's the same thing we can kind of get with code reviews, right? There's so many benefits to having them in your organization. For example, they can help you to catch issues before they impact production, right? Because you have multiple people looking at the code. You can also gain exposure to new ideas, for example. Also, it can help you to keep the design of the code consistent throughout the application. And then in the end, you have this better product that's more maintainable because you have this process going throughout your organization. I don't actually work for GitHub, but I appreciate what they do, especially their code review feature. So recently, they added this ability to choose who can review your code, which is really nice because some people may opt out of it. But if you need someone from the API team to take a look at what you're doing, put their name on it. And then you can get feedback right there, all in the same screen. It's really a very streamlined way to have code reviews in your organization. Now, on to Leak Canary. I kind of grappled with including this one here because I consider it like both a preventative and sort of a diagnostic tool, but I think we can focus on like the preventative nature of it in this section. Now the setup is minimal. This is basically it, and some minor modifications to your application class. And then you can just start taking advantage of Leak Canary. So let's say we look at this snippet of code. Can anybody just tell me what's wrong just by looking at it? Yes, right here, say it louder. Static toolbar, that's the problem, right? No, don't do that. That can cause memory leaks, right? So Leak Canary would actually trigger a notification to you when it sees this kind of code. You click on the notification, and then boom, toolbar, right? So this guy, he could work for me. He didn't even need Leak Canary, right? But just imagine you have a lot of kind of common mistakes, maybe like some issues when you're merging code together. No one, it's hard to kind of manually, visually inspect all these things. So you have Leak Canary there to help you. Now, let's move on to architecture, which is like our fourth item. Is anyone here from Denver? Okay. Is this like a famous place in Denver? Because it's like the best picture I could find. Okay, good. What is it? Very nice, very nice. Denver, props, this is a nice picture. Okay, so architecture, Denver, right? The way we structure our applications can have a huge impact on how easy or difficult it is to address issues early on. So if we have foo here, just like our huge God class with tons of dependencies, and then someone goes, we need to change something in foo. No, not foo, right? You know, that's how everyone feels because it's so decoupled, you have no idea if you're gonna break everything else. So instead, we would wanna take a different approach, right? Break out foo's dependencies, spread it out among a few extra classes, have some interfaces, right? It's so much prettier to work with an architecture like this that's more decoupled, and it's also much easier to catch issues earlier on. For this, I like to use MVP coupled with Dagger. I've used it again and again, and it does the job, right? It helps me to have clean code that's easier to catch issues. And since you enjoyed that graphic so much, I decided to create another one for you. So here's just like a rough overview of how I like to structure my applications. So we have an activity fragment. They have presenters. Presenters talk to services. Services have conversations with repositories in the database. And then there's some sort of asynchronous thing happening, either an event bus or ArcsJava, to kind of get things never blocking the UI thread. And just like that, we're squashing bugs. We're squashing bugs because we're not letting them get there in the first place. And now, our final item in prevention is API testing. Now, as Android developers, we mostly need to integrate with a backend service. And this can kind of leave us at the mercy of the API guys. Like, I don't know if you've ever had those issues where it's like, not my fault, it's not my fault. Well, the app needs to change, well, the API needs to change it. Let's stop it. I found a solution, right? API testing. My tool of choice to do this is Postman. It's just a very simple GUI. It lets you have REST requests, and you can test their responses. Let's look at how we could use Postman to kind of end that like finger-pointing war. So first thing is, it's plain simple. You send requests, you get responses, and then you run test scripts. That's it. That's all you have to do. So let's look at an example. I'm here inside the Postman app on a Mac, and I'm going to send a request. So you notice over here, I have this collection of requests called sample API, and then in the middle, I have the URL that I want to execute. It's a get URL, and I just click send. That's it. That's all I had to do. And then right there beneath, that's my response. So the first phase of using Postman, dead simple. That's all we need. Now, here's a close-up view of that response. So this is going to be our response that we want to like test against, that we want to validate. So if I want to create the most basic test, I just want to make sure it was successful. That's it. Boom. One line of JavaScript. I know it's JavaScript, but it doesn't matter. It's one line, right? It's just one line. So we make sure the response code is 200. And every single time we run that request in Postman, it will run this test for us and validate that it was successful. So even if you just took all of your API requests and just slapped this on every single test, now you know if the API is like down or there's some issues without having to like go through the app layer to find out. Now let's look at another one. I want to make sure that I get back an array. So here, I create a variable and I say I need an array, or it could just be null. I'm fine with that. Next, I parse it using JSON, standard JavaScript things here. And then finally, there's a JS validator thing. And I just pop that in there. It's going to tell me if it came back as an object. Well, the API is broken. I was expecting an array or null. And so then 3 lines of JavaScript code, more or less, and I've just added so much more validation to my APIs. Simple and powerful. But it gets even better. I know your jaw's already dropping. You're like, this is enough, Annyce, no more, right? No, it's better than that, okay? So let's say you have an individual item and you want to make sure the schema is correct. So you have these IDs, you have some title and body, they need to be strings. You can spec out every single property of an object. and run that through the validator, right? So here I say, oh, the user ID and the ID, those need to be integers. The title and the body, those need to be strings. So if the API sends me back the title as a float, we've got problems, right? My test is gonna fail. And I'll know immediately without having to kind of like play those games back and forth. So when I run the test, it will tell me, hey, that type's invalid. It's a string, but I thought it was gonna be an integer. Here's the path, and you can just get all this information for free through Postman. So finally, the best part of all is you can set this up on a monitor. So once you put in all this effort to create your collections, write all of these different tests, you can create a monitor that runs at a certain time every day and just send you an email letting you know whether or not your API is passing. So here we are on the web UI for monitors. Just click play. It's going to execute all my tests. And then underneath, it'll tell me exactly which endpoints and which tests were successful or failed. And then it would also send me that via an email, which is pretty cool. So the war, it's been fought and won forever, right? We've looked at 4 items that can greatly reduce problems in our application before they affect our end users. But we really only kind of scratched the surface on many of them. So I encourage you to spend some time just like digging deeper into each one and seeing like which piece of it could you apply to your application or your organization. So we're at our final aspect of being a great Android developer, and that's diagnosis. Now, when a doctor is presented with various symptoms from their patient, they have to do the like really challenging task of figuring out what is the root cause. So this might involve some type of diagnostic procedures, patient history, perhaps a physical exam. For instance, let's say a 74-year-old comes in and says, I have a lot of stomach pain, right? Then a 34-year-old comes in, oh, I have a lot of stomach pain. What's the chance that they're going to get exactly the same diagnosis? Pretty slim, right? Because there's so many other factors that doctors have to take into account. The person's age, their family history, their type of lifestyle. She's probably not like running marathons. I mean, there's so many things that he may say like, well, is it a marathon running? No, probably not for this one. For this one, I don't know, maybe. So really the patient is the key factor in determining the final outcome. And so likewise, as a developer, the best tool you have at your disposal is actually you, right? Because you're the most intimately familiar with your application structure, the architecture, and the dark places no one wants to go. You, the developer, know those things. But like any good doctor, you still want to have some tools to help you when you're trying to figure out what's going on. And so that's what we're going to focus on in our last section. Now, at this time, I want to give you just 30 seconds to list out your top 3 tools for debugging issues on a little small piece of paper that's coming around. Okay, so just right off the top of your head, don't overthink this. Don't be engineers on this. Just 3 things you use all the time when someone's like, something's wrong with the app. Those 3 things. So slowly coming around, just like 30 seconds. Very nice. Cool, so some of the things that were mentioned we're actually going to cover, which is awesome. Now, Android Studio, that's our IDE of choice, and perhaps it's the most powerful tool that we have at our disposal for diagnosing issues in our apps. But we're going to look at kind of the combination of things that we can use, and we'll start with things we can do in our own code, things outside of Android Studio, inside, and then on an emulator or on our actual devices. So let's start with our code. This was mentioned, but the most basic thing you can do is just write some logs, right? In this example, we're using Timber to log failures. It's my library of choice. It makes it easy to choose like which logs make it into whatever builds, if any. So Timber is, ideal for doing that. Then just using Logcat, in this case, this is Pidcat, its cousin. You can kind of see when an exception is thrown in the app, the exact line of code that caused the exception, and then these things are typically easier to just kind of like, ooh, put a null check, whatever. If you're using Java, you'll have to do that a lot, right? So essentially no effort on our part, we can diagnose and fix the issue. But But what about when our users are sort of out there in the wild? Like, we don't really know what they're doing with our apps. So that's why we have to take the little extra step and log events as well. For example, we are going to send some events to our analytics provider, but then we're going to take that extra step and say like, hey, also send this thing to Crashlytics if it's available. Now, what do you get by just adding that little teeny bit of extra code? If a crash happens in your application, you can kind of see these breadcrumbs. So this crash happened right after they failed to log in. So now I'm kind of, okay, well, I know, all right, this was the crash, they failed to log in. Now I kind of have somewhere to start in figuring out what's going on and how I can prevent the crash. So really powerful just from that little teeny bit of extra code. Now, things that exist outside of Android Studio. So we kind of looked at Crashlytics a little teeny bit. So let's look at some of the additional features that Crashlytics offers. First, it can track stability among releases of your application. So if you release tons of bugs in 2.11, then in 2.12 you can go, oh, okay, cool, looks like we're doing better. Or I have a partial rollout going in Google Play, 10%. I look at Crashlytics and, oh man, this is crazy. We have 10% crash-free users. I can try to fix it before it affects the full population of my users. Also, you can find out which devices and operating systems your users are on, so you can help to focus your effort. I work on an application that's primarily used in Africa. Techno is the device of choice. So there's always a Techno on my desk to make sure that I can try to pin things down and try to reproduce them. It wouldn't be beneficial for me to spend all my time optimizing for the Pixel XL when none of my users have it, right? And so from Crashlytics, I'm able to kind of focus my effort when I'm trying to figure out, well, where do I need to debug, and how. The next tool is Classy Shark. So if you had a bug that wasn't in your source code, then Classy Shark can kind of help you out, right? Because it shows you this sort of graphical display of the methods in each package. And maybe you didn't know like a certain library was bringing things in. You can figure that out by means of Classy Shark. It also has this APK dashboard, which gives you summary information about your DAX files. So it goes through, it does an analysis, it tries to find duplicate dependencies, it tries to find server-side libraries if somehow they made it into your app, or some that were deprecated. Because you may be relying on this one third-party library, but behind the scenes, they're like bringing in a bunch of junk. So you can use Classy Shark to try to track it down and figure it out. And then moving on to Battery Historian. This one, as the name implies, allows you to figure out things about the battery, right? So you can look at different battery-related events on particular devices. And then it's kind of plotted on this timeline, and then you can kind of zoom in and out. So here's a prime example. People say, hey, the app is draining my battery. Thank you for all that useful information, right? Just really know where I can go here, right? So what do? Okay, attach it, open the app, run Battery Historian, take the logs, and I go, whew, GPS active 26 minutes. But that's wrong, right? Because the app was open for 2 seconds. So that's bad, right? And I fixed it. So it's that whole red line. And then after, you just see like little bloop, bloop. Yeah, that's how GPS is supposed to be, not all the time, right? But that's something that only Battery Historian helped me figure out was the cause of the issue in the app, which is pretty awesome. Another thing I want to kind of shout out about Battery Historian is that you can see the CPU usage ranking for all the different processes on your device. So if your app is in the list, maybe that's wrong, right? For example, Fitbit was number 5 in the list, and I have like a whopping 6K steps per day. So it made me curious, like, what is Fitbit up to? Like, why are they? But anyway, if you work for Fitbit, no offense, but it's on the list. So this is something that you can use to figure out like, hey, maybe my app is a troublemaker on the device. Super cool. And if you want to know more about like doing cool things with battery, The official documentation is actually really good. They show you examples, how you can monitor battery state, change your app's behavior based on the battery status, and more. So our final tool, Systrace. I saved it for last because it looks scary, right? The UI is not the best, but it does provide the most information about what's going on. Key thing, like, okay, I don't want to look at any of those other things. Look at the little circles with the F's inside. Those are like your frames. And if they're green, good. If they're yellow or red, maybe something's going on. So just quick spot of Systrace, you can kind of see something's going on. Then, even less work, click the alerts pane and it'll list out all the alerts it found. You're like, oh, expensive measure layout pass. Okay, so right, click that. It'll tell you this is what happened, this is what it took. Here's a video on how you can fix it, right? So that's with the latest version of Systrace. It even tells you how to go fix your problem. So pretty cool. Now let's switch gears just a little bit and look at some cool things inside of Android Studio. So first up is the Apk Analyzer. I've been working on Android for a long time, and the APK was like this mystery. You did all this hard work, and then there was like APK. You didn't know what was going on in there. But now you have this analyzer. So you can figure out like, what is actually happening to my final merged manifest file? What about the string resources? And you can just kind of keep digging in by means of the APK Analyzer. It's super useful if you get complaints from QA about the pro-guarded version of your app. So that's something like you kind of just do your thing day to day. Everything works for me, but they're using the pro-guarded version. So hey, let me figure out what's happening there inside the APK. Next up is the Android Profiler. This is new in Studio 3.0. It's going to replace the Android Monitor tab. It's going to display real-time updates for CPU, memory, and network. So let's just quickly look at each one. So first up is memory. If you click in, you can get this like more detailed statistics, which is kind of like what we're doing here. We're taking a heap dump, and then the results will appear down below. And you can click on each item and get even more information in the side pane. So it used to be a little more difficult to get this. It was kind of spread out among two different things, and then sometimes you'd have to use like the Eclipse Memory Analyzer tool to kind of dig in deeper, but now it's like all here in one place. Next is the CPU Profiler. This one will show the CPU usage like over time, and in this particular example, I'm gonna just kind of like select some segment of time, look in and do a sample-based trace to figure out what's going on. And then I can see information like here about the different threads that are happening, just tons of useful information to diagnose issues with the CPU, which of course means that this tool will now replace trace view. I know, I was kind of sad too. Yeah, trace view's gone. Okay, finally, network. So this is an example of using the kind of network analyzer. This is really useful if you see like a lot of spikes. You're like, I didn't think my app was like doing something with the network. What's going on? And then you can dig in, look at the requests. Here I'm just kind of zooming in on an area. It requested a lot of images, and then if I click on one, it's gonna kind of open up this pane over here, and it'll actually show me the image that I downloaded. And I can inspect the headers, the call stack, all here inside of Android Studio. And we used to have to use a lot of third-party tools to kind of get this information, but now we don't have to anymore. It's amazing. So our final section, emulator or a device. The first thing is GPU overdraw. And overdraw, just quickly, is when you draw pixels on top of each other. Overdraw, right? And that's bad because it can kind of slow down your application. You want to ideally keep things in the blue-green range. So here's an example of what your device might look like. I chose my favorite app, Pidcat, and they do a pretty good job, right? A lot of blue-green. Nice work, guys, girls, Pidcat. But if you have some screens that are slow to load, you just turn this on and check for overdraw. Really simple thing to do. Here's the next one, profile GPU rendering. Puts that green bar, which is that 16 millisecond per frame target. And if you see the lines just keep going over it, then like that's jank in your app, and you can try to fix it. This is useful when certain devices get complaints. So if they're like, hey, on the Techno, this screen takes forever to draw. Okay, and then I put on profile GPU rendering to figure out what's happening. And each of those bars map to a different stage. If you're interested, it's all in the documentation. We've looked at over a dozen tools. That's a lot. I know, I'm tired. That can either help us in preventing bugs or aid us in diagnosing the cause of bugs. So hopefully you learned at least like one new tool or one new way to use a tool today. So you've made it to the end. You give yourself a pat on the back. We talked about a lot, and I know sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Just all the things that we have to do to succeed. It kind of ties into what we were talking about in our keynote. It's just like all the things, right? But if you take nothing else away from this particular talk, leave with this. It's gonna take study, for sure. It's gonna take use of preventative techniques, skillful handling of diagnostic tools to be a great Android developer. But regardless of which thing you choose to tackle next, first, do no harm. Thank you. So if you grab the slides, I have links to all the resources. They're also all listed on my website. The link is pinned to my Twitter page. I will be around the entire conference, probably drinking coffee. So feel free to come up to me and ask me any questions that you may have. So thank you.